Okay, well, welcome to another interview held by EFSAS. This time we have with us Dr. Juncal Fernández-Garayzabal. Um, for the purposes of pronunciation, I'm going to refer to you as Dr. Juncal in this program.
I have no problem, no issues.
Okay, just to give you an introduction, of course, you're a program manager at the Counter Extremism Project and a co-founder of Parallel Networks, which is a non-profit organization dedicated to combating polarization, hate, and extremism. Um, Dr. Juncal has gained professional experience researching conflicts, forced migrations, organized crime, and security. Her research has developed through collaboration in projects with institutions like Georgetown University, Comillas ICADE in Madrid, the Hague Center for Strategic Studies, and UNICEF. She's also gained hands-on experience in peace building while being in Latin America and Africa, where she provided psychosocial support to internally displaced populations and other victims of extremism and violence in post-conflict settings. And since 2019, she has been working to build the capacity of several countries, including the United States, the Republic of Maldives, Tajikistan, Kyrgyzstan, and Spain, to effectively rehabilitate and reintegrate individuals returning from conflict areas and those convicted for extremism-related offenses. So, Dr. Juncal, welcome.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
It's a pleasure to host you and to interview you as one of the very few experts on the Maldives. You don't find that many in our work. So before we start with some to the point questions, how come you at some point of time became so involved with the Maldives and not with its beauty or its tourism, but mostly with extremism and terrorism?
Pure chance. If you want to know the honest to God truth, that was pure chance.
Okay.
So I was indeed involved with work at Parallel Networks and contributing to rehabilitation and reintegration projects of extremist offenders in the United States when a colleague of mine in conjunction at CP and in conjunction with the International Center for Religion and Diplomacy, they applied for a grant in the Republic of Maldives, sponsored by the State Department, the United States State Department. And we got the grant, and that's how I ended up managing the Maldives program. It's not an exotic story. I didn't have a breakthrough moment. It was, honest to God, just pure chance.
Okay. Well, and now you have become one of the most foremost experts on the country and the issue of extremism over there. So, we have talked about this a bit earlier in the when we were preparing for this interview. What I would actually like to go a little bit into history, because the terrorism problem in Maldives is not very old, or is it very old?
No, it's definitely not. It's not a new phenomenon. And I think, just to cut a long story pretty short, I would probably go back to the ratification of the Constitution in 2007 and the democratic election of Mohammed Nasheed in 2008, because along with democracy, right, it also came the openness to greater religious expression, including a greater presence of more radical ideologies in the public space. And well, these voices influenced Maldivian society in many ways. I mean, not just beyond expiring domestic acts of terror, but under the presidency of Abdullah Yameen during 2013 and 2018, the Maldives reportedly became the country with the highest number of foreign terrorist fighters per capita.
Mm-hmm. And they still struggle with this problem.
Yes, very much so. A recent commentary from the police commissioner in Maldives said that in the country there are approximately 1,400 people willing to die or kill for their ideology.
Okay. And So much of because this is Maldives is predominantly Muslim. So
Yes,
when you talk about extremism, you're talking about Islamic extremism,
yes, sir.
um, and it's part of South Asia. Now, when we look at South Asia, the main problem of Islamic extremism originated in South Asia from basically the Wahhabi thought in the Arabian Peninsula,
Mm-hmm.
the madrasa setup in Pakistan, and the Deobandi school of thought originally in India.
Mm-hmm.
Is that also true? Is that true for Maldives as well, or does that come
Yes.
from somewhere else?
No, that is very much true in the Maldives during the Gayoom regime. Indeed, he had been educated in Egypt under a more Muslim Brotherhood oriented version of Islam, but towards the end of his regime, there was increased openness from Maldives to other countries and a lot of students going to study overseas, both to Saudi Arabia and to Pakistan.
Okay, and these students went there for Islamic studies, or
Sorry. Yes, they did go for there to. Some of them went for Islamic studies, other just went to study overseas because that's something that we can touch upon later in the conversation. Accessibility to higher education in Maldives is limited, so there's a lot of students that do go overseas. So a lot of them did travel to Pakistan to study, and they received some religious education while they were there, or claimed to have received. I think it's better choice of words to say they claimed to have received some religious education.
okay, and well, but did that go hand in hand with training, or was it just indoctrination?
As far as I know, it just came with learning, so that ideological components of radicalization. I wouldn't I do not have enough information to say whether everybody that came back was ideologically radicalized to the point that they posed a violent threat. I do not have an assessment to say that. There's definitely the ideological indoctrination. I do not know about military training. I cannot, there's not enough data that indicates that people that were overseas also received military training. There are, however, Maldivians who have, who traveled to Afghanistan, who traveled to Pakistan and that were involved in violent incidents in Pakistan. But again, no indication that they had been previously in Pakistan or that they had been ideologically radicalized in Pakistan or Saudi Arabia. No.
But do you think that the highest number of foreign fighters per capita is related to this outflux of Maldivians going for studies to Saudi Arabia and to Pakistan and coming back with an indoctrinated mindset?
Yes and no. It definitely plays a part, but it was a discussion that I was having with a colleague recently, right? There's this twisted interpretation of the faith, if you want to call it like that. There needs to be a series of underlying grievances or motives, reasons, whichever they may be, that attract you to that twisted interpretation of the faith. And have and allow you to find answers in that twisted interpretation of the faith. So we were describing it more like a present, right? There's, if you have the box, you have all these things inside, and that would be the grievances, right? But it only is a present when you put the wrapping paper over it, and that's the role the ideology plays. It just provides, it is the glue that sticks everything together.
And what were the reasons in the Maldives?
I could go this let me try and raise it to the best of my abilities, because it is a complex process. So and I think it also came hand in hand with the openness and the democratization of the Maldives. And I'm not saying this in a bad way, it's just a series of events that led us to where we are today. So let me start indeed with the openness of the Maldives to more Western influences, and to actually the Maldives becoming a main tourist destination for people across the world. Because of course, with that came an openness to a way of life that was not necessarily in line with a more traditional Maldivian way of life, not just for islands being taken over for resorts and all of that, but people having to be removed from their traditional way of life, such as fishing.
Mhm.
But things like sex out of wedlock or homosexual couples coming to the country, just to spend time together, which is something that for us in the West might be very normal, but does cause a clash for somebody with a more of a traditional mentality. So that, and with this progressive alleged economic development in the Maldives, yes, from a GDP perspective, because of course tourism accounts for most of the GDP in the country, but that gap, so to say, between the haves and have-nots has increased very much in the Maldives. And to that gap, you need to add the fact that, well, the Maldives is basically an archipelago country. It's composed of little islands that are often dispersed from one another, and most of the resources are centralized in the capital area in Male. So everything that relates to getting an appropriate delivery of services, whether, for example, mental health or physical health, higher education, you need to go to the Male area, which has become increasingly expensive for local salaries, increasingly crowded, which does not contribute to anybody's well-being. And it's becoming increasingly difficult for everybody to hold a job that allows them to pay rent, especially among young population, right, where they have to share an apartment among several of them just to make ends meet and be able to get an education. And then if you're struggling, there's very little access to resources like mental health. For single mothers, for example, the stipend that they get from the government is really low. So there's a lot of socioeconomic issues in the Maldives that, yeah, I think would make certain ideologies particularly appealing, especially when speaking about social justice.
And it was during the time of 2007, 2008 that these people then, because of these reasons, went outside for education? Or was that earlier?
That started before. That started before. During 2007, 2008 was the first time that there was any conversations about extremism actually being a problem in the Maldives. And that's when Maldivian citizens actually took part in terrorist attacks in Pakistan. For example, 2008, there's claims that Maldivian citizens were involved in the Mumbai attacks. So that period of time is when, well, the chicken came home to roost, if you want to call it like that. It's when there was finally an opening to say, well, we do have a problem. And then, of course, some people that had traveled to Pakistan ended up in Afghanistan too, under support the Taliban regime. So it's definitely not a new issue that comes from myriad of underlying problems.
But it's also not something which started like in Saudi Arabia, Afghanistan, and Pakistan in the 80s. It's much later.
Yes, I mean, you do have to take into consideration that the Maldives was essentially a dictatorship for 30 years until 2007. So, during, as with every dictatorship, there's a big period of time where it's a very closed environment. And as I said, gradually the Maldives started opening up to Saudi Arabia, to Pakistan, and that you could say planted the seed, but I don't think you can point it out as the only single cause,
No, of
because
course, you
yeah.
have of these causes. But why do you think that still, despite this problem, despite having the highest number per capita of foreign fighters, why is it that Maldives doesn't get the attention, even whether it's positive or negative? When you go through the UN designated terrorist list, there's not many Maldivian organizations on it or individuals. You don't see so much of debate about it or around it in the press or in the West. Is it because it's strategically unimportant, or is it because the highest number of extremists per capita in Maldives do not pose a threat to countries around them because it is an island?
I mean, it is an island country, but and of course, you need to take into consideration that when we speak about the highest foreign number, the highest number of foreign fighters per capita, the the country of the Maldives doesn't have a high number of population. If I'm not mistaken, you caught me right there because I forgot to review my statistics on that. But the total number doesn't account. I mean, it sounds like a lot because it is a lot, the highest number of foreign fighters per capita, but in total numbers, the number is not particularly high. And
But even
I
in
wouldn't,
absolute numbers, it is around what, 1,500 or so?
oh no, so there's a report from December 2015 that mentioned that there were approximately 200 people that had 200 people that had attempted to leave the Maldives,
Mhm.
and the success rates of arrival to Iraq and Syria had been approximately 40%. So as I say, the numbers total are not particularly high with regards to other areas of the world, for example, Central Asia, where the number of the volume of people in total numbers is very high. And
Half a million
also, I
people.
think,
Yes, I just
sorry,
got a message saying that it need Maldives is around just a bit over 500,000 people
there we
living
go.
in Maldives.
Thank you. That's where I was going to go, but I didn't revise it this morning, and I don't like talking. I mean, expressing with certainty things that I'm not certain on, and this is one of them.
But if you still compare that to, for example, a country like India, where it's
Mhm.
1.4 billion,
Mhm.
and if you put the Muslim population, if you talk about Islamic radicalism, around 240 million, and even there, the people who have joined ISIS is just 200. So in that comparison, it's still very, very huge.
Yes, yes, I know, but that's why I say in especially in relative terms, right? It is huge to say that, and not in a good way, that you're the country with most foreign fighters per capita. In total numbers, of course, in comparison, it's very, very little. I mean, just to give an example, there's you know, just recently, total numbers in Central Asia for some countries are about 800 foreign fighters, right? So, that are planned on being returned. And of course, 200 in comparison to Maldives is nothing. I mean, and so I don't know if that's what doesn't attract enough attention from the international community with regards to Maldives. But I do have to say that every time I say I'm going to work for Maldives, people are very confused. I absolutely confused as to the kind of work that you do. How is that related? How's that related to Maldives anyway? And you have to explain the whole thing. And people just don't understand how well, you have this beautiful country, the beautiful islands, the beautiful everything. In what world would you want to leave that paradise? And it's like, well, if you scratch beyond the surface, as everywhere, there are its complications. It's not as idyllic as it seems. And I think understanding that dynamic in the Maldives is a little bit complicated. Plus the fact that indeed, I mean, geographically, the Maldives is isolated, and Maldivian citizens have not been particularly active when it comes to participating in international incidents, except in Pakistan, as I say, 2007, 2008, Mumbai attacks, 2008. It's more of a domestic thing when it has come to Maldivians taking the lead or perpetrating attacks. It has been mostly domestic.
Okay, and but do you think that because of this problem, it has become geostrategically more important? Sorry.
I mean, I think it's important, like addressing the issue of radicalization of foreign fighters. I mean, it's not because of Maldives and because I have a particular, devotion towards to that country by now, but to think that because the Maldives is geographically isolated, um, that means that nobody should pay attention to the problem going on, especially right where I mean, it's because it's not just foreign fighters. There's a huge issue with radicalization in Maldivian prisons, for example. Right outside prisons, there's issues with radicalization, and to think that because the Maldives is geographically isolated, that will not pose a problem going forward. I think it's a mistake. Like there's no indications, for example, that there will be another caliphate right? At least in the near future, except for what's going on in Africa right now. But you wouldn't properly call it an Islamic State. But what if it does happen? What if it does happen? Or what if Maldivian citizens decide to join West Africa and East Africa, right? So I think it's a mistake to actually consider that because it is geographically isolated, that in a world, in this globalized world, that it would be impossible for, Maldivian citizens in this case to travel overseas and join a different struggle. And I mean, and this has been seen by fighters in other contexts, like for example, in Chechnya, right? So people that came back from war, from conflict, and had nothing, there weren't proper rehabilitation and reintegration programs for them, so to say. They did end up joining other conflicts. So there's no reason to think or to believe that the same wouldn't happen in Maldives.
Okay. Well, now you talked about reintegrating the people who come back, and you of course work.
Yes.
Of course, I might ask maybe a politically incorrect question.
No
But
problem.
to what lengths do you think that society should go to reintegrate extremists people?
Oof. To You're muted.
I just lost you for a second, but please go on.
Oh, no worries. I think we're going to have to cut a little bit here.
Yeah.
But to make it easier, let me just start answering your question from the beginning. Because I was indeed, I mean, I wouldn't call it a politically incorrect question. I would definitely call it a difficult one, because you do have to struggle between, security. Do these people actually pose a threat? Just when they return after they leave prison, or not, because there's not enough evidence to prosecute them and they directly undergo programming that may exist in the country or posed directly in their communities. So do these individuals actually pose a risk? Then I think is also, the moral debate of, what you were asking. Do they deserve a second chance? And who gets to decide who deserves a second chance? But of course, then the issue, then you get to understand the complexity of the issue, right? And I'm going to give a very simple example. Women and children, returning from Iraq and Syria. I'm not even going to get into, the security aspect of adult returnees. That's not the question. But children, they are not to blame for their parents' actions, right? They were either taken by their parents at a very young age, or they were, brought overseas. So again, no actual accountability, no legal accountability for these children. So you bring them back, and how do you ensure that the process is done well enough that they won't be resentful, right? Or they develop maladaptive mechanisms to cope with all the pain of having been overseas, of in this case being separated from their parents, right? If we imagine their father has either died or is in prison in Syria, and their mother might still be in the camps, or she comes back and she's incarcerated, and then what happens with the child? Are they put in the care of the state, because the state considers that the family was, played a significant role in the radicalization of the child's parents, and therefore they are a risk factor for the kid? Or do you place them with a family that the child may have no relationship whatsoever with, because they've spent most of their life overseas? So again, that's from the moral debate, is who deserves.
I would get it from the children if you talk about the children, but let's say there's an extremist, or
But what happens to adult parents, right, also affects the well-being of the child. That's why I say it's a very complex. As I say, it's moral, it's security, it's also taking into consideration and then this, I guess, is an offshoot of the morality component of it. In a lot of countries, there's people that never joined a terrorist organization and that may also be struggling, right? And then you have the grievances and comments like I have gotten in various contexts, which is, okay, so do I have to go on to become a terrorist in order for my government to provide me with some sort of assistance? So, you know,
Do you understand there are some Western politicians or Western parties in Europe, because they're also dealing with this problem, who have maybe not expressed it as vocally as I'm going to put it, but they've actually wished that these terrorists or the extremists who were returning would have been, the society would have been better off if they had just died there.
yes.
Do you understand that argument? Do you agree with it?
I don't, I understand where that comes from.
Mm-hmm.
I am not sure I fully agree with it. I actually don't. I mean, because I do understand, trust me, that there's people that are completely unremorseful and they still believe that what they did is the correct thing. But again, I do believe in people changing. I do believe if one is able to address whatever caused the person to radicalize in the first place, and as we explained earlier, it is a myriad of things that can contribute to pushing a person down that pathway. I understand there's people that, again, there's people that might be completely irredeemable, and me coming from a country like Spain, we've seen this with members of Euskaditas Katasuna ETA, right? Mm-hmm. There's members that still to this day are completely unremorseful, and I mean, I wouldn't go as far as to say they wouldn't hesitate to pick up again. I'm going to be cautious with that statement, but you know what I mean. Mm-hmm. But there's others who have expressed remorse, and that has taken time, and that has taken work with the person, not just at an individual level, but at a community level. We had attempts in Spain, for example, at restorative justice approaches with former members of the organization and victims. That didn't go well, but anyway, it took time. It really did take time. So just taking somebody who just returned and not even giving them the opportunity to actually amend their ways, if you want to call it like that. I know that sounds too much of a hippie discourse, but what I'm trying to say is giving them the opportunity to at least, be law-abiding citizens once again. Like, I don't think. Go ahead.
Law-abiding. I want to pick up on that. Is that indeed you need to reintegrate? I also believe that at some point of time, people can do something terrible, but people can change. But there's of course a process in the middle, which is law taking its course.
Mm-hmm.
When these extremists return, how do you actually prove whether they were involved, and then whether they will be punished for it, whether they were involved in decapitating people, in turning women into sex slaves, in doing horrible crimes against humanity? So how do we balance that?
I mean, I'm not part of the investigative procedures that each country has, so I rely on their intelligence services and gathering all the necessary evidence to prosecute people. But
it's difficult because countries like Britain, France, Belgium are coping with this problem that we have no idea what happened in Syria.
But I mean, then it's up to you to amend. I mean, as I say, I'm not here as a policymaker to tell individual countries what to do. But there's maybe just enough evidence to prosecute somebody would be that they joined a terrorist group, because it was, late 2014, ISIS was already declared an international terrorist group. So maybe just that is sufficient argument to prosecute somebody. Right? So that legal process in each country, plus the investigations, and what their respective constitutions and laws say about this, that's not up to me to decide. I do understand the security component of it. Like, how do you know that this person is not a threat. Like, even if we did not find enough evidence, to prosecute this person, even if the person decided to join the group before it was declared an international terrorist organization, because I'm sure there's cases like that where people left before it was declared a terrorist group, do they pose a threat to others when they come back? So where are they ideologically, and is there a chance that they're going to commit violence? That is, I think, the bottom line of all of this. Apart from the fact that, of course, law needs to take its course, and if somebody commits a crime, please go ahead and do it and incarcerate them. It's just, and I know this is also going to be an unpopular opinion, right? But we have, and done pretty well in a lot of countries, right, have worked towards the rehabilitation and reintegration of people who have also committed horrible crimes. There's murderers. I mean, not here in the United States where I'm at right now, because there's life sentence, but for example, in European countries, there's no such thing as a life sentence. People commit murders and don't serve a life sentence. There's rapists in prison that will, come out to society one day. True. There's pedophiles that will, come back to society. So I understand the concern, but right, it's and this is a very unpopular opinion, and I'm aware there's resources to try and understand and address the criminogenic needs of other different kinds of people who have committed criminal offenses that are also very, very horrible. And we are throwing our hands up in the air. And I understand, listen, if a pedophile recidivates, for example, the effects are not nearly half as bad as if somebody decides to, like what happened in the London Bridge attacks, right? Somebody underwent programming, they feigned their remorse and they feigned everything, and then on their way to a conference where they were going to speak about their process and their redemption process, they ended up stabbing people and killing people. So from that regard, I do understand where the concern comes from, but I don't think it's an insurmountable task. I really don't. And there's been resources dedicated to, as I was saying, addressing the criminogenic needs of different people, and this is not insurmountable.
And
I don't think it is.
And is the Maldives working, if you cannot say that, then of course tell me that, but is the Maldives working with European countries, US, India, where they have also dealt with this problem? Are they working together on this?
I cannot speak for their collaborations with other countries. I mean, I just mentioned earlier in the interview how I ended up working in the Maldives was a United States State Department grant. So yes, there are bilateral relations existing with different countries to ensure that the Maldives, in this case, has the necessary capacity to, rehabilitate and reintegrate people coming home from, the battlefield.
So would you call Maldives a vulnerable country at the moment?
In comparison to whom? That's always my question. Yes, I mean, yes, I think the Maldives right now is a very polarized country, and you need to be there to see it, right? It's from a social standpoint, from a religious standpoint, it's a country that is becoming increasingly polarized, and I think that's always that always makes a country vulnerable. Absolutely.
And just to go a little bit towards the geopolitical, geostrategic issue in this regard, the Maldives has become a growing destination for Chinese interest and Chinese foreign direct investment. What do you make of that? Is that a good thing? Is that a bad thing? Is that indeed to tap into the vulnerability of the country or the polarization of the country? Because there has, of course, been this tussle even in the democratic process of people fighting elections who are either perceived as being pro-China or anti-China.
I don't think in this case the Chinese play a role so much in politics, at least not overtly. The interest of Maldives, right? I think it's just a key strategic spot in the middle of the the Indian Ocean, and it's a gateway from South and Southeast Asia, to Africa, to East Africa. Sorry, so East. Sometimes I confuse my East and my West. So to East Africa, and as with a lot of other countries, China is making investments through infrastructure, and of course that causes some sort of influence uh, at a political level.
Mhm.
And though it's more of geostrategic interest from the economic standpoint rather than, in this case, with regards to terrorism and security. That's what I would say. However, the development that the Maldives in this case is currently undergoing, with help and assistance from the Chinese, I think will only cause the issues that we were talking about earlier, the centralization of resources, the overcrowdedness of the Mali area, and the little availability for services and whatnot. I think that is going to increase certain problems. Yes, I really think so.
And like you said, it is of course gaining a larger strategic significance within the Indian Ocean. Um, your analysis, of course, has the Maldives sought to hedge between China, India, the Quad, or do you see any clear alignment? Where they stand.
I don't think there's a clear alignment. Truth be told, I think that it's pretty split, right, with regards to people who um, are more pro-China in economic development, others that are more pro-United States. But publicly, I don't think that. I think it's countries like India, China, the United States that are more vocal about their interests in the Maldives and make moves towards, the Maldives depending on their interests than the other way around.
Mhm.
And in that regard, I do understand the position of the Maldivian government of not taking any clear sides. Insofar that, there's the Chinese are willing to invest in development, which is something that I agree the Maldives
Yeah.
needs. How it is done, that's a different story, but I do believe that the country does need it. And for example, countries like the United States who can, address other concerns of the Maldivian government, in this case, security issues. So, you know,
Mm. So, but do you think that because there's a problem of foreign fighters, which we basically started with, is a problem which the Europe has dealt with, the US to a lesser extent maybe has also dealt with, um, and other countries are dealing with it. Do you think there is a need? There's a bigger need for these countries to assist the Maldives, or help, whether that's with know-how, knowledge, expertise, or funds. Do you think that needs to be increased?
ironically enough, when it comes to foreign fighters, right? No, but I mean, I'm going to put it very bluntly, but and then I'll develop. Nobody knows what we're doing. Listen, hear me out.
Mhm.
It is it is such a new phenomenon, right? I mean, ISIS was the terrorist group that inspired more adherents, right, than any other group in history, and now they're coming back to their countries of origin. And I think, I mean, of course, there's countries in Europe that have dealt with terrorism before, Spain, Ireland, so it's not it's not an unknown phenomenon. What is unknown and what is new to everybody is the fact that these people traveled overseas in mass numbers.
Mhm.
And now, what do you do with them? It's not that you can strip them of their nationality, at least not in all cases, because they're not dual citizens of two countries. So you have two options. You either leave them in the camps in Iraq, in northeast Syria in this case, which I think causes a greater security concern than bringing them back to their countries of origin, or as I say, you bring them back. However, yes, I think the countries like the Maldives do need that assistance. And I think, I mean, financial assistance, I mean, I think it needs to always be very justified to what the money is being spent. And yes, the know-how. I think there's a lot that can be applied of what we have learned so far with regards to dealing with terrorism in general. It's just claiming that somebody has all the answers to the rehabilitation and reintegration process of extremists, of foreign fighters and their families. I don't think that's accurate. I wouldn't say anybody has the right answers, especially because of the fact that this is a long-term process. It's not that because they return and they undergo 6 months to 1 year of programming, for example, that we can guarantee that 5 years down the road, something happens. They have there's a life crisis of whatever nature, and they recidivate. And I don't mean recidivate necessarily that they go and plant a bomb or go and stab people, but they may find solace again in extremist ideologies, or they may develop, I don't know, in the case of children, substance use and abuse issues, right? Because they're unable to cope with their circumstances. So, as I say, know-how, yes, but with everything that we know so far, I mean, whether it's how you conduct investigations, how to ensure that, there's no plotting in prisons, right, for people who may be radicalized or who are convicted for extremist offenses. When it comes to rehabilitation and reintegration, there's a lot that can be learned from DDR programming in Africa. There's a lot that can be learned from, just the reintegration and rehabilitation of violent offenders in general, how that's done, what areas need to be touched upon to reduce that chance of recidivism.
Which does leave us with one more problem, is that in the beginning, of course, you said that there are many socio-economic reasons as well why people did this.
Yes.
So now you rehabilitate them while still the socio-economic environment is probably not only the same, but maybe even worse. Especially when you just mentioned, for example, indeed, that, for example, Chinese investments are probably going to exacerbate the problem even more. So how do you, on a socio-economic level, make a more conducive environment to tackle this?
That is an incredibly complicated question, and that's something that I grapple with a lot, because it's not just providing employment to people who come back. It's something that I breezed past earlier, which is, what about the local population? They may be struggling with unemployment too. So how do you do this, right? And I was recently in Kyrgyzstan also for rehabilitation and then a reintegration project. And one of the things that we were discussing is how do we make sure, that we can contribute to rehabilitation and reintegration, and everybody's speaking about employment, and how do you provide that to a person? Because they were saying, oh, I don't know, in the case of women, just get them sewing machines. And I was thinking to myself, but what if they don't want a sewing machine? First of all. Second, if you buy everybody a sewing machine, then the market's going to be saturated and there's no space for them either. And then why are you, and local grievances, why are you providing people, who, independent of what the law says, I consider they have committed an offense, right? So I don't necessarily see them in a good light, and you're helping them, but not helping me. And so that took me to a conversation that I had in the Maldives recently. So yes, and again, that taps into the financial assistance that you were speaking about. For example, development programs, right? Long-term development programs that, for example, take the Maldives, and I'm pulling this from a real conversation that I had while there. If you're able to create some sort of internship program that, and let me give an example as a hotel, as a resort, because they have tons of them there. Like you as an admin assistant, or, you get an internship with the I don't know what's wrong with my camera, sorry. You get an internship with, hotel or resort X, let's call it whatever, with the possibility of employment. at least there's a stage there where you've earned your, it's not directly putting people in employment programs. At least there's the work prior that can help mitigate that stigma. But what if you made that program accessible to particularly vulnerable population in general, whether it be people with disabilities, whether it be single mothers who are struggling to make ends meet? Why not other people coming home from prison who might have difficulties finding employment, right? So it is possible, as I say, it's complex, and it requires, not the short-term addressing and managing immediate threats kind of thing. It's more, then it's when we start talking about long-term sustainable development programs. Mm-hmm. So it is, it's there, the question's there, it's just very complicated, and we're talking about two different things.
Yes, of course.
I mean, we're talking about two
very different things, but of course one is based on the other, and they both
exactly no, they go together. One transitions into the other, but how exactly do you do this? It's difficult.
Okay, so I'm coming to the end of this, but I want to still ask you one thing. Is of course that you just mentioned that there have been people, or there have been Maldivians who were part of the Mumbai attack in 2008. What you've seen in the region, of course, with the fall of ISIS, is that many of these people joined new groups, old groups, made new groups, and suddenly changed their objectives, changed their their loyalties. Do you think there are still people from the Maldives who have done that in that region? So are there people from the Maldives who are now part of ISKP or other organizations in the AFPAC region, or have they all returned and known that this is not going to work?
I don't think they have all returned and know this is going to work. And I can guarantee you. As I say, the official numbers with regards to this, I think do not always reflect the reality of the foreign fighter phenomenon in Maldives. So as I say, I don't have enough information to accurately answer that question. Even if I would revise videos or whatever, most of them are old, so I don't know what happened to those people. Are they still overseas? Are they not? Are they in prison? Did they die? There's a lot of information that I'm sure the Maldivian intelligence services, who, I mean, I have nothing bad to say about. They probably have that information. I do not, and even if I did, I don't think I'm not sure I could make that public. But being honest with you, 100%, I do not have, a certainty with regards to numbers, a certainty with regards to how many of them have died, how many of them are currently incarcerated in Syria, how many of them actually went on to join a group. That's
so
something.
You think it is quite likely that, God forbid, we might, there might be another terrorist attack in the region where people from the Maldives would be involved?
Yes, I mean, and it's not that uncommon. My first in-person trip to Maldives was in May 2021, and they tried to murder former President Nasheed while I was there. They blew up a motorcycle. Luckily, nothing happened, but so domestic, and as I was saying earlier, in an age of globalization, especially people who might have self-returned to Maldives and that are, they have not been prosecuted. It's very easy for them to go overseas. It's very easy for them to reconnect with new groups that are forming in Maldives. As I say, the people that attempted the murder of former President Nasheed are currently in prison, but there's a lot of other people that are radicalizing in Maldives, or there might be small cells in Maldives that they can join. So, yeah.
Do you think this problem has actually affected one of the main sources of income of Maldives, which is tourism?
No.
So that's still as good?
Yes. And I tell you, I fly frequently because of work, and nope, there is no such thing. And I mean, The Sultan Park attacks in 2007, the recent attack against Nasheed, they all happened in Mali. And I guess that for those who haven't been in Maldives, they don't necessarily cannot necessarily picture what I'm about to say, but Mali, the city of Mali, is overcrowded. It's a small place, and then very far away from all of the resorts.
Yeah, of course.
So it's two absolutely different worlds. It's unless somebody would actually go on to a resort and, God forbid, do something, the resorts and the true Maldives, so to say, are different worlds.
Different.
So I don't think I again, going back to the comments of people like the kind of work that you do, what on earth are you doing in the Maldives? It's because there's such cognitive dissonance between the world of the resorts that definitely exists and this other true Maldives that not a lot of people know. Yeah.
Do you think there, and this is my last question, and then I'm going to wrap up, but do you think there is still people who go on these excursions towards Saudi Arabia, Pakistan?
Yes, but it's been more formalized. It's been more formalized. So there's in the Maldives, there's a Ministry of Islamic Affairs, and a lot of their employees have received an education in Saudi Arabia. And they've studied for 7 years, including Arabic and the Holy Quran. So there is. It's just now when it comes to the public Islam or the official Islamic narrative in the country, it does fall under the Ministry of Islamic Affairs, and everything related to the religious curriculum in schools and whatnot. There is a government body that regulates this.
How do they check what they're learning when they go to Saudi Arabia and Pakistan? Because their curriculum is, of course, theirs.
Yes, I'm assuming there must be some sort of agreements between both governments, because, as I say, members of or workers under the Ministry of Islamic Affairs, most of them have all studied in Saudi Arabia.
Checking, there's a better system of check and balances now.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. And when they come back to the Maldives, of course, as I say, they're part of a ministry that, of course, works in conjunction with other government bodies, and everything that is put in place is regulated from a central state, from the central government. That does not imply that, as that other people may interpret their religion differently, but when it comes to the official discourse surrounding religion, there is a centralized discourse that comes from the central government, and that is overseen, of course, by different government actors.
Well, Dr. Juncal, thank you very much. I think it has been a very, very interesting interview, because we have touched upon the moral issues, the legal issues, but also we have concluded that even if we tackle all of those, we're still left with the socio-economic issues.
Yes.
In the country, which of course even well-established welfare states in Europe have.
I was going to say.
Exactly.
I was going to say.
Because most of the people from Brussels who went there came from backgrounds which are neglected. So there you also have this socio-economic issue. That is always, of course, going to remain. And hopefully Maldives being dealing with a lesser population would be able to tackle that more. But then again, you have said that Mali is, the concentration of it. So maybe the government in Mali or the people in Maldives need to come up with a more encompassing, project.
I guess, as I say, I think it's when we're speaking about rehabilitation and reintegration of foreign fighters and their families, it's a very complex issue because it's very new, and I think each setting has its complications. We're speaking about the Maldives in this case, which is a country that is still, economically developing, but yet, for example, from my experience, I think it would be easier for women and children that are, especially adult women in this case, that are not legally prosecuted, to integrate in a country where 100% of the population is Muslim. And seeing a woman in a niqab on the street is not uncommon. And I think with regards to stigma or feeling at home, it would be a lot easier than, for example, in a country like France, when even just your religious attire can be a problem and can already cause certain stigma. So as I say, this is a very, very complex issue that requires understanding and analyzing each context independently, because social welfare programs are great in Europe. I'm not saying that, but we struggle with other issues, which in this case is discrimination and stigmatization, and which is not, being, it's an issue that is being further fostered by people with the discourse like you were mentioning earlier, that they would be better off if they died in the battlefield, which of course that doesn't just stigmatize people that left, but whole communities in general, and that's very, very dangerous. So very complex issue.
And of course, we need to be, or at least the state, or we need to have different moral standards than people who were terrorists, of course. So that is one of the first foundations of rule-based, law-based society.
Yeah.
Dr. Juncal, thank you very much for
Thank you.
joining us and taking your time to discuss such an interesting issue. And I
Thank you.
think I've left out many questions.
Probably we can sit together again whenever you want.
Yes,
I'll be more than happy.
should do this. We should do this again soon.
Absolutely. Just, well, you know where to find me. So
Thank you very much.
thank you. Thank you so very much. And again, my apologies for being so late.
Thank you very much. Bye bye.
Thank you. Have a lovely rest of your day. Bye.